أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فکر بھائی انشاءاللہ. اے اہل عزا عزا کے دن غم کی راتیں بکا کے دن فریاد کے فاطمہ کی بستی اجڑی آبادی کربلا کے دن پہنچے. اے اہل عزا عزا کے محمد وآل محمد صلوات. رخصت امام حسین مدینہ سے. کیجے مقبول میری زیارت آخر اماں، اپنا گھر چھوڑ کے جاتا ہے مسافر اماں، اپنا گھر چھوڑ کے جاتا ہے مسافر اماں. تیری تربت پہ دیا روز جلانے والا، دل کی باتیں تجھے ہر روز سنانے والا، ایسا جاتا ہے کہ اب گھر میں نہیں آئے گا، تیرا شبیر مدینے سے چلا جائے گا. کیجے مقبول میری زیارت آخر اماں، اپنا گھر چھوڑ کے جاتا مسافر اماں، اور اماں دشمن جو ہوا سارا زمانہ اپنا، ہم بھی کعبے کو بنا لیں گے ٹھکانہ اپنا، خون سے خاک کو گلزار بنا جائیں گے، اور بیابان میں ایک بستی بسا جائیں گے، کیجے مقبول میری زیارت آخر اماں، اپنا گھر چھوڑ کے جاتا ہے مسافر اماں، اور ہاں میں تنہا نہیں جاتا ہوں، یہاں پر سب ہیں، قاسم و اکبر و عباس ہیں اور زینب ہیں، بن کے پرنور اجالوں کی ضیا جاتے ہیں، پنجے تن ساتھ میں سب کرب و بلا جاتے ہیں، کیجے مقبول میری زیارت آخر اماں، اپنا گھر چھوڑ کے جاتا ہے مسافر اماں، اور ہو کے رخصت جو رضا شاہ دو عالم اٹھے، قبر زہرا سے صدا آئی کہ لو ہم اٹھے، اے قضا تو جو میرے لال کو بلواتی ہے، ساتھ بیٹے کے یہ ماں در بھی چلی آتی ہے، کیجے مقبول میری زیارت آخر اماں، اپنا گھر چھوڑ کے جاتا ہے مسافر اماں، اور محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره، وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته، والصلاة والسلام على خاتم رسوله إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين، الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين، والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والإبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكادمية والحجج الردوية والجود الثقفية والنقابة النقبية والحيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، له معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه يحفظونه من أمر الله، إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Sayyid al-Shuhada and the martyrs of Karbala, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When one examines the position of the day of Ashura in human history, in terms of days which carried a historical significance, in terms of days which impacted the trajectory of mankind, and in terms of days which carried a sheer power just by their very remembrance, you'll find that the day of Ashura stands in a league of its own and is one which is unparalleled from a number of different angles. From the first perspective, when it comes to the day of Ashura, each of us recognize that the remembrance of the day of Ashura is not simply a historical remembrance. Yes, just like any other day, the day of Ashura was contained in a period of time which, according to the traditional understanding, begins at sunrise and it ends at sunset. But each of us recognizes that this day was more than a historical period. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You find that each of us recognizes that this day is much more than a period in time, but rather its reality is beyond history. You know, even if you look at the battle which took place upon the day of Ashura, the battle which accumulated in the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein was only a battle of 7 hours roughly. There was a famous Iranian professor and mathematician by the name of Dr. Ahmad Barashk. Dr. Ahmad Barashk, he examined the historical sources which mention the details about the day of Ashura, and he reconstructed the timeline upon that day. And according to his research, he says that the first arrow is fired by the army of Umar bin Sa'd at roughly 9 a.m. And the martyrdom of Sayyid al-Shuhada takes place near the time of Asr at around 4 p.m. If you look at that span, that's only a span of 7 hours. But I say, look at that day of Ashura. That even though this battle took place 7 hours and it was a day which was contained in time, each of us recognizes its reality is much more. That when we gather within this month, we don't gather just to remember a historic event, but rather we remember Ashura because we consider it a devotional act. We consider it an act of ibadah to remember Ashura. You see, this remembrance of the events which took place on the day of Ashura, this very remembrance we know is one which brings us closer to God, closer to the religion, closer to salvation, and closer to creating a life of eternal success, which is the goal of every human being. In other words, the very remembrance of the day of Ashura is able to transform and bring change into the life of a person. That's why when you look at the hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, you find that every aspect of the day of Ashura was considered sacred. Imam Jaffari as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Imam Jaffari as-Sadiq, in a famous tradition, he says, نفس المحموم لنا المختم لظلمنا تسبيح وحمه لأمرنا عبادة. That what does the Imam say? The Imam says that sorrowful breathing for the person who is entrenched in the sorrow of the oppression which occurred upon us Ahlul Bayt, even that breathing is considered the tasbih and sanctification of Allah. You know, when a person goes through hardship and a person is in a state of sorrow, you find that their breath, it becomes heavy. It becomes harder to breathe. Imam as-Sadiq says that if that sorrow is for us, Ali Muhammad, then even that breathing is the tasbih of Allah. And that sorrow which a person he feels, that is the ibadah and the worship of Allah. So you find from the first angle, the day of Ashura is unique in that the remembrance of the events of the day of Ashura have been considered devotional and they're not strictly historical. From the second angle, how is the day of Ashura unique? You see, there were many days in history which demonstrated human virtue and qualities. There were battles where smaller armies, they beat out larger armies because of their bravery. And there were battles where there were individuals who would go to the front line to protect those who were with them. But show me in history where a leader tells his army that tomorrow you'll be martyred. Even if a leader knows that this is over, this is the end, he doesn't tell his soldiers because that has an impact upon the morale of his army. According to the traditions of Ahlul Bayt, not only did Sayyid al-Shuhada tell his companions that tomorrow you'll be martyred, it's stated according to the tradition of the Imams that he showed them their position in paradise. But despite knowing that they'll be martyred, each of these individuals, they demonstrated the highest level of human virtues. They demonstrated the most righteous form of human qualities. You see, the second way in which the day of Ashura is unique is that while other days had virtues and qualities, the day of Ashura is a symbol for human virtue. The day of Ashura is a symbol that, oh human being, when you struggle within your life, if you want to see the potential and the capacity of a human being, then go and look at those who are with Hussein in Karbala. that is that reason that God has created man as his vicegerent and his representative. That look at those in Karbala, that the day of Ashura is a symbol of virtue. You know, on the 11th of Muharram, when Imam Zainul Abidin was going past the body of his father, it's stated in a narration that the color on the face of Imam Zainul Abidin begins to change. Sayyida Zainab says, "Oh my nephew, that atajudu bin nafsik ya baqiyata jaddi wa abi wa ikhwati." That, oh, the remnant of my grandfather and father and brothers, why is it? It's as if I see that your soul is about to leave your body. Imam Zainul Abidin, he says that what is a son supposed to do when he sees his father like this? But after that, Sayyida Zainab, she says a line which demonstrates the role of Ashura as a symbol of virtue. Sayyida Zainab, she says to Imam Zainul Abidin that وَيَنْسَبُونَ لِهَذَا الطَّفْ عَلَمًا لِقَبْرِ عَبِيكَ سَيِّدِ الشُّهَدَاء لَا يَدْرُسُ أَثَرُ وَلَا يَعْفُ رَسَمُ. She says that the angels will make upon the grave of your father a sign. And this sign will never be erased. It will never be removed. في قرور الليالي والأيام, as the days and the nights they change, this sign upon the grave of your father, it won't change. ولا يجتهدن أئمة الكفر وأشياء الدلالة في تطميسه ومهبه. Even though the leaders of misguidance and disbelief and their followers, they'll try to erase this sign, but the more they try, فَلَا يَزْدَادُ أَثَرُهُ إِلَّا ظُهُورًا وَلَا أَمْرُهُ إِلَّا عُلُوًا. The more this sign will become apparent and the more their affairs will become elevated. In other words, if anyone comes and tries to tamper with the interpretation of Karbala, or they conceal the reality of the day of Ashura, you find that they won't be able to do so because this is that reality which will become apparent. And from this second level, you find the day of Ashura is unique in human history. But from the third level, in what ways is the day of Ashura unique? You see, whenever change it occurs, to awaken the consciousness of a group or to change the thinking of a group is something which requires a large amount of time. You know, you begin to plan with one generation, by the second and the third generation, you begin to see the fruits of those efforts. Even when you look at recent human history, many of the philosophical changes by philosophers such as Hume and Kant and Locke, who said that relativism is the way to go, there are no absolute values and true knowledge can't be attained. It's only 200-300 years after these individuals, now we begin to see what is the impact of their thought. You know, they said to a famous revolutionary that, "Where is your army?" He says that my army is in the laps of their mothers. Because change is something gradual. To change the consciousness requires time. But the day of Ashura is that event that in one afternoon the consciousness of a nation was revived. And this is something which is unique in human history. That how heedless did that nation of the Prophet had become. You see, it was only 50 years after the death of Rasulullah, they killed the grandson of Rasulullah. That same Hussein, each and every one of them had heard the tradition, Al-Hasan wal-Hussein Sayyiday Shabab Ahl al-Jannah. That Hassan and Hussein are the leaders of the youth of paradise. This ummah had seen that Hussein comes on the back of Rasulullah. Rasulullah extends that sajda. No, this ummah had seen that one day as Rasulullah is on the pulpit, Imam al-Hussein walks into the mosque of Rasulullah. And you know what the Prophet of God does when Imam al-Hussein walks into that mosque? Rasulullah, he gets off the mimbar. He picks that child in his arm and he comes back on the pulpit. They begin to say, "Oh Rasulullah, this is something which is strange. You were on the mimbar, you get off, you pick this child." You know what Rasulullah says? He says, "Hada Husaynun, fa'rifuhu wansuruhu." That this is Hussein, recognize Hussein and support Hussein. But in just 50 years, they had gathered to kill that Hussein. And they recognized this reality. You know, when Abdullah bin Umar, Imam al-Hussein on his journey from Medina towards Karbala, there were a number of people who would meet with the Imam. Abdullah bin Umar, he comes to the Imam and he says, "O grandson of the Prophet, I heard the Prophet of God say that Hussein will be killed and a group of Muslims will be killed with them. And if you don't support Hussein, then you will be humiliated and degraded." That Abdullah bin Umar is telling Sayyid al-Shuhada this tradition, but he's not coming with Sayyid al-Shuhada. And why does this happen? You find from the first angle, that society had become absorbed in materialistic goals. From the second level, they forgot the divine message. And from the third level, you found that the leaders of that society neglected the authority and the position of Ahlul Bayt. So from this angle, that society, their consciousness had become dead by that time period. But the moment that Sayyid al-Shuhada is killed in Karbala, you find one uprising after another until that Banu Umayyah, just within 100 years, you find that the rule is finished. That this is the power of Ashura. The role of Ashura in our lives is that Ashura in that day is able to bring a transformation within us. And that's why the subject of analysis in tonight's introductory majlis is the understanding of Ashura and its role in bringing about a religious transformation. You see, within these 12 nights, we'll examine different aspects of the day of Ashura. We'll examine the sermons of Sayyid al-Shuhada on the day of Ashura. We'll examine the sources that mention the events on the day of Ashura. We'll examine the different Quranic verses, the du'as, the series of events. But tonight, as means of an introduction, we'll discuss in the following stages. Number one, what is the importance of making the most of opportunities to bring about religious transformation and change? Number two, what does the Quran say about change and religious transformation? Number three, what examples of change and transformation do we see in Islamic history? Number four, in the journey of Imam al-Hussein from Medina to Karbala, were there individuals who changed their lives and were able to transform for the better? And number five, does this transformative impact of Ashura mean that the movement of Imam al-Hussein was a revolution, or was it not a revolution? You see, when we discuss upon these different points, the first source that we go towards is towards the Quran and the Hadith literature. When one examines the literature of Hadith, they'll find that the Hadith have given a strong emphasis that a person should make use of the opportunities that they're given. And when it comes to making use of these opportunities and bringing about a change and transformation, you find the irony is that destination and perfection which we are seeking, that destination is already within us. You know, the Quran in Surah Ar-Rum, chapter 30, verse 30, it says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةُ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. You know what Allah says? He says, "O mankind, establish your face upon the path uprightly, that nature from God which he has preordained mankind upon. You see, from this verse, 3 points they come forth. The first point is that this verse, it says, O man, establish your face upon the path. You know what it means to establish your face upon something? When an individual is able to focus on a goal without wavering left or right, without becoming unaware of that goal, that's when you establish yourself upon a path. You know, oftentimes, there is something which is in front of us. Because we're not paying attention, we're not able to see it. Or it's in front of us and we become distracted. But a person, when it comes to that deen of God and that path of God, a person should have an immense amount of focus. That's why a hadith, it says, Al-mu'minu kal-jabal al-rasikh, that a believer is like a mountain which is embedded within the ground. You see, when a mountain's within the ground, nothing shakes that mountain. And in reality, that's how the ashab and the companion of Sayyid al-Shuhada were like on the day of Ashura. You know, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Imam al-Baqir says in a tradition that when the companions of Hussein were attacked on the day of Ashura, their bodies, they didn't feel pain. Now, what does it mean that their bodies, they didn't feel pain? You know, when you go to Surah Al-Yusuf and you look at the story in Surah Yusuf, you find that after Yusuf was thrown in the well, the economic minister of Egypt took Yusuf within his home. And the story, it goes that the wife of Yusuf, the economic minister, becomes enchanted with the beauty of Yusuf. After she had become enchanted with Yusuf's beauty, all of the women of Egypt, they began to gossip about her. When they began to gossip, that lady said, I'm going to invite all of these women to a gathering. In front of them, I'm going to place fruits, and in front of them, I'm going to place a knife in their hands so they can cut the fruit. The Quran, it says that as they were cutting the fruit, she calls out Yusuf. When Yusuf comes out, they're so mesmerized by the beauty of Yusuf, فَقْطَعْ أَيْدِيَهُنَّ, that they begin to cut their hand. I say this is the answer to that hadith. That on one side they saw the beauty of Yusuf and they didn't notice they were cutting their hands. The companions of Sayyid al-Shuhada are those individuals who are witnessing the reality of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And as they're witnessing that reality of Sayyid al-Shuhada, arrow after arrow is going to their body. You find that they don't turn left or right. They stay upon the path of the deen. That's why the Quran, it says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا. You see, the second point within this ayat is that when a person holds on to the path, they do it uprightly. And the third point that we see from this verse is an interesting point. That verse, it says that, O mankind, that path which you're seeking, God has already made you upon that path. In other words, the GPS is pre-programmed within you. The answers are within you. That's why Allama Tabatabai, when he would discuss all of these different proofs for the existence of God, he says none of them are a proof. They say, what do you mean none of them are a proof? He says there is no reality which is clearer than the reality of God. Thus, why do you need a proof for his existence? At most, they are tanbihat and different factors which make you aware. But you know, if the verse says this, that all of this is within our nature, then the question comes up, then why is it some people don't believe in God? Or why is it some people have a misunderstanding of God? You know, there's a hadith in the Ashari school of thought. That hadith, it says that God, every Laylatul Jummah, every Thursday night, he comes down sitting on a donkey and he commands the affairs of the world. You see, how is it that people, they come to such understandings? You find from one level, it has to do with the environment itself, that many people, they just follow the false thoughts of their predecessors, or they follow the false thoughts of a religious leader without questioning it as well. But another aspect as to why individuals, they go towards this misunderstanding is because they get absorbed in materialism. You see, when you get absorbed in materialism, your goal is nothing but a materialistic goal. Then at that point, you find that veils are created upon you. And that understanding over there that you had, that understanding isn't as strong. But when these different incidents occur, when a person goes into heedlessness, you find God doesn't leave a person alone. God gives individuals opportunities to turn back. That if you've done everything wrong in your life, even until your final breath, that opportunity to turn towards Allah is there. And you know, sometimes these opportunities come in the form of recognizing our own shortcomings, and sometimes they come in the form of hardship from outside. From one level, we realize our weakness, our limitation, and that realization is an opportunity. But from another level, you find that hardship, the reason it occurs is that it allows us to turn back towards God. That's why Allah in the Quran in chapter 7, He says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا فِي قَرْيَةٍ مِّن نَبِيٍّ إِلَّا أَخَذْنَا أَهْلَهَا, that we have not sent a prophet to a town except that we overtook its people بِالْبَأْسَاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَضَرَّؤُونَ, that we overtook its people with hardship and distress. Why? In order that they can humble themselves. That one of the reasons for hardship and distress to come towards them is so that they can humble themselves. And the problem is that after this hardship, most people, they turn back towards their same patterns. They return. Isn't that the pattern of the Quran? God sends a prophet, He gives them guidance. They follow the prophet, they neglect his message, they're destroyed, another community it comes. And that theme is there in the Quran time and time again. But that's why when opportunities come, such as this month of Muharram, you find those opportunities are of the utmost importance. That within this month, attend these majalis, recite Suratul Fajr, cry over the musibah of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen, in a famous tradition, he says about different opportunities that al-fursatu tamurru marra sahabi, that opportunities pass in the way that clouds they pass. Fantahizu furas al-khair, that make avail of these opportunities of good. In another tradition, he says, Al-fursatu sariyatul fawt wa badiyatul oud, that opportunities pass quickly and they return slowly. So in that sense, when an opportunity it comes, you find one needs to make use of it to bring about that transformation within them. And it's through that transformation one begins to realize the value of these opportunities. That's why when you look at the Quran, there is a pivotal verse of the Quran which speaks about making the use of opportunities and bringing about change. And that is chapter 13, verse 11. Allah within this verse, He says that when He speaks about mankind, He says, لَهُ مُؤَكِّبَاتٌ مِّن بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِ, that mankind has angels watching over him from in front and back. يَحْفَظُونَهُ مِنْ أَمْرِ اللَّهِ, they protect him by the command of Allah. And then He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ, that indeed Allah does not change a group of people until they change themselves. That until a group of people change themselves, Allah does not change that group. You see, the first aspect of this verse it mentions that God has sent the angels to surround the human being. You know, the metaphor which is given is that imagine a person is on a journey, and as he's going through this journey, he's surrounded by all sides of individuals protecting him. God is giving this figurative metaphor that, oh mankind, in the same way you are on a journey. The Quran says, Ya ayyuhal insan innaka kadihun ila rabbika kadhan famulaqi. That, oh mankind, you're struggling as you meet your Lord. That isn't life difficult? Isn't life full of hardships? But all of these hardships have a direction. That, oh mankind, you are struggling towards your Creator, and struggling you'll meet Him. You know, when the Quran, it speaks about mankind, it says, وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ وَإِلَيْهِ تُقْلَبُونَ. That towards God you'll return. In other words, this journey is not a journey of a new destination, but rather this journey is a journey of returning to one's origin, a return to one's humanity. And that is what Sayyid al-Shuhada showed in Karbala. You know, before Imam al-Hussein, he comes to Karbala, he says to his companions that at this halting station, take extra water. They didn't understand that why does Hussein want us to take extra water? When the army of Hurr stops the Imam's army, the Imam says, now go and give these individuals water. Those same individuals who on the 7th of Muharram would deny water for Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein, he gives them water to the extent that one individual, he narrates that I was the last person in the army. And I was the final one to reach. Everyone already had water. But as I was sitting there exhausted, a man comes to me, and with his hands he begins to give me water. I didn't have the energy to take that water from his hands and drink it myself. I said to him, I don't have that within me. The man says, then lower your camel. The moment the camel was lowered, that man with his hands puts the water bag upon the mouth of the individual. That individual would later ask that, who was that man who gave me water? They said, that is none other than Hussein ibn Ali. You see, what is Karbala? Karbala is a return to one's human condition. Life makes us hard-hearted. Life makes us negligent. But this Muharram is that opportunity to re-enliven the heart. And that's why the Quran, it says that if you want to change your life, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That these circumstances in the outside of your life, these different challenges, these different hardships, they don't change until you change yourself. Between one's own action and the blessings they're given, there's a direct connection. That when one turns their life around, God brings goodness. That's why Allah says that the one who moves close to me, the span of a hand, I move towards him the span of an arm. That is that change. And that's why when you look at Islamic history, many of the companions of Ahlul Bayt were not always religious individuals. One of the greatest companions of Ahlul Bayt, of Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. One of the greatest companions of Imam Zainul Abidin was an individual by the name of Abu Hamza Thumali. Many individuals, they've heard the name of this companion because there's a dua in Shahr Ramadan. But when you look at Abu Hamza, Abu Hamza was called the Salman of his time period. And he is the one who was called Luqman as well for his wisdom. But if you look at the story of Abu Hamza Thumali, Abu Hamza al-Tumali was a thief. He used to rob people. But that same individual who didn't care about the rights of those around him, that same individual became such a companion that Imam Zainul Abidin says this individual is like Salman al-Muhammadi. Now I'll give you another example. In the time period of Rasulullah, there was an individual by the name of Jundab ibn al-Junada. Jundab ibn al-Janada was from a tribe known as Banu Ghifar. Banu Ghifar used to worship idols. One day this Jundab, he's looking at this idol and he places a bowl of yogurt as a means of a So he waits there, he looks at the idol, and as he's looking at the idol, a fox comes, urinates on the idol, and the fox goes away. Even from a fox, that is this a human intellect that we worship such idols? This individual, he hears after a number of years that the man who says there is no God but Allah, and he prays in the priest, his wife Khadija. This Jundab, when he hears this incident, he decides to go to Makkah. When he goes to Makkah, he arrives in the evening time. He sits in the precinct of the Kaaba, but he doesn't see Rasulullah. As he's sitting in the precinct of the Kaaba, a young man comes and he says that, "Oh man, you look like you are not from here. Is there anything I can do for you?" The man says, "No, leave me here." But that young individual says, "No, come and stay in my home." Jundab stays in the home of the man. The second day he goes back towards the Kaaba. He's waiting, he doesn't see Rasulullah. The second day that same young man goes to Jundab and he says, "Oh man, isn't it time that you find a home? You're still sitting here." Young man, as he's speaking to Jundab, he says, "Oh Jundab, what is it that you're seeking? It's been 2 days." Jundab says that, "If you promise not to tell anyone, I'll tell you." The young man says, "By Allah, I won't tell anyone." Jundab says that, "I heard there is a prophet in this land, and I want to meet that prophet." The young man says then, "Oh Jundab, I will take you to him in the daytime and you walk away without going to the house of the Prophet." That Jundab, he goes towards the house of Rasulullah. Rasulullah says, "Oh man, where are you from?" He says, "I'm from Banu al-Ghifar." Rasulullah says, "What do you want?" He says, "I want to accept Islam." "How do I accept Islam?" Rasulullah says that you believe that there is no God but Allah, Muhammad is his messenger, you stay away from idolatry, you stay away from evil, and you do good. And he says to that young man, "Oh man, don't tell anyone your faith." You know what this Jundab does? He leaves Rasulullah, he goes to the Kaaba, and he says, "O Quraysh, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." When he says this, they begin to attack him from all sides until Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, saves him, and the second day he does the same thing. You know who that Jundab was? That Jundab was that companion by the name of Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. Abu Dhar al-Ghifari went through such a transformation that he goes from being somebody from a tribe that worshipped idols, from a tribe that would rob individuals on the streets, to a person who was considered to be on the 9th level of Iman. You know, and there are many examples of the companions of Ahlul Bayt that they had a journey and a transformation in their life. There was an individual by the name of Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad. Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad was an individual who was a thief. He would rob individuals. One day, as he's about to rob this entire caravan, he hears somebody in that caravan reciting the verse of the Quran, "Alam ya'ni lilladina amanu an takhsha'a qulubuhum li dhikrillah." Has time not come for those who believe that their hearts are humbled before the remembrance of God? And he says at that moment, yes, that time has come, and he changes his circumstances. You see, even from Medina to Karbala, there were certain individuals that weren't with Imam al-Hussein in Medina. One of those individuals was Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, if you look at the works of history, they say Kana Uthmaniyan. In other words, Zuhair did not believe in the legitimacy of the Khilafat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And as Imam al-Hussein is going from Makkah, from Medina to Makkah, Makkah to Karbala, Zuhair was going in the same direction. But you know what Zuhair would do? Zuhair, if Imam al-Hussein stopped on one side, he would stop on another side. He wouldn't go meet with Imam al-Hussein. He would make sure he avoided Imam al-Hussein. But when they came to one halting station, Imam al-Hussein sends his servant to the camp of Zuhair. And that servant says that the grandson of Rasulullah is calling you. Zuhair, he rejects the invitation until his wife says, oh Zuhair, the grandson of Rasulullah is calling and you're not going. Zuhair, he ends up going and speaking with Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know, history doesn't record what conversation took place in that tent, but Zuhair had such a transformation that the moment he comes out of that tent, he says to his wife, you are free to go. He says to his servant, you're free, and I am going with Hussein. You see, this is that same Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, that same man who didn't even want to meet Sayyid al-Shuhada. On the night before Ashura, he says, oh Hussein, oh grandson of Rasulullah, even if they kill me and dismember my body and burn me and I'm brought back to life and they do this 70,000 times, each time I'll sacrifice myself for you, O Hussein. This is that same Zuhair, that when Imam al-Hussein, in his final moments, he stood alone and he looks at the bodies of the companions. He says, Ya Muslim ibn al-Awsaja, Ya Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, Ya Abtal al-Safa, Ya Fursan al-Hijah, Mali unadikum fala tujibun. Why is it, Zuhair, Muslim Habib, that I call you but you don't reply to me? You see, as long as life is there, that opportunity is there. And amongst the greatest of those opportunities is the majalis of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know, there's many individuals, you'll only see them come to the mosque on the 10th of Muharram. And oftentimes people don't make fun of them that these guys are one-timers. They only come on the day of Ashura. But if you look at it from another perspective, these are those people, they only have one thread connecting them to religion. And that one thread is none but Hussein ibn Ali. That this is Sayyid al-Shuhada. You see, Imam al-Hussein, time and time again, he would give those on the other side an opportunity to change. He would say to them that, do you not know that I am the son of the daughter of Rasulullah? Do you not know that I am the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Do you not know that Jaffar al-Tayyar was my uncle? But one of the most famous examples of change is the line of Sayyid al-Shuhada to Hur. You know, when Hur stops the army of Imam al-Hussein, Imam al-Hussein says a line which begins a transformation in Hur. You know what the Imam says? The Imam says, Taqilatka ummuk, that, oh Hur, may your mother weep over you. You know, in Arabic, that's a very harsh line to say to someone. But at that moment, So you find that Hur begins this process which each of us is beginning on these nights. And that is that process of transformation. Hur says, Ama wallah, by God, لو كان غيرك من العرب أقوله لي وهو على مثل الحال التي أنت عليها ما تركت ذكر أمه بالثقل. Hur, he says that by God, if any of the Arabs said to me what you said to me, I would say the same line back towards them that made your mother weep over you. But Hur, he says, ولكن والله ما لي إلى ذكر أمك من سبيل إلا بأحسن ما يقدر إليه. But the only path I have to speak about your mother is in the best of ways possible. Because your mother is Fatima al-Zahra. You see, from that moment, Hur began that process of transformation. It was one opportunity. It was one event. But that event, it built up to Hur coming to the side of Sayyid al-Shuhada and acquiring eternal salvation. And that is the power of Ashura and the power of remembering the day of Ashura. And this is that day that was remembered like no other. You know, how did Imam Zainul Abidin remember the day of Ashura? It's stated that when they would place water in front of Imam Zainul Abidin, the Imam would say, قُتِلَ عَبِي أَطْشَانًا, that my father was killed thirsty, take that water. One day Imam Zainul Abidin would be in Medina, and as the Imam is in Medina, he would see a butcher slaughtering an animal. The Imam would say that, did you give water to this animal? The man would say, I'm a Muslim, it's within our law. He would say that, did you give food to this animal? The man says, yes, I'm a Muslim. He says, did you sharpen the sword? Did you make sure there were no other animals in front of him? The man says, yes, I did all of that. Imam Zainul Abidin would say that when they killed my father, neither did they give him food, nor did they give him water, neither did they sharpen the sword, and from 70 paces my aunt Zainab would watch وَالشِّمَرْ جَالِسٌ عَلَى صَدْرِ الْحُسَيْنِ. These are those days of Muharram. You know, when Imam Musa al-Qadim would see the moon of Muharram, it's stated in the hadith that the Imam's face would change when he sees the moon of Muharram. That how was Ashura remembered? Imam Zainul Abidin, one day, a man comes to Medina and he says, Ana al-Gharib, I'm alone. The moment he says, Ana al-Gharib, Imam Zainul Abidin says, oh man, if you were to pass away, would they put a kafan and a shroud on your body? Would they bury you, oh man? And the man says, yes, they would. The Imam says, then don't say you are Gharib. If anyone was Gharib, it was my grandfather, it was my father Hussein was Gharib. This day of the first of Muharram, which is approaching, it's stated that Imam al-Rida was seen crying upon this day. And when Imam al-Rida was seen crying, a companion by the name of Rayhan ibn Shabib, he says to the Imam that, why are you crying? The Imam says, oh Ibn Shabib, do you not know that it's the day of Ashura? And Ibn Shabib says, oh Imam, what happened on the day of Ashura? The Imam says that upon this day, my father was killed. Dubiha kama yudbahul kabsh. That they slaughtered my father in the way that they slaughter a sheep. You know, ulama, they discuss that why does the Imam give this analogy? Because when you slaughter a sheep, you give water to the sheep. When you slaughter a sheep, you sharpen the sword. You make sure food is there. They said the reason Imam al-Rida says that my father was slaughtered in the way that a sheep is slaughtered is because when you slaughter a sheep, no one is there to say, don't kill this animal. In the same way, on the day of Ashura, as they martyred the grandson of Rasulullah, no one was there to say that this is Hussein, the grandson of Rasulullah. But amongst the most famous incidents of the remembrance of Ashura is when Bilal al-Khuzai goes to Imam al-Rida and he says, "Oh Imam, I recited the musibah of your grandfather." The Imam says, "Oh Bilal, recite the lines that you've written." Bilal, he says, "Madarisu ayatin khalat min tilawatin wa manzilu wahyin muqfirul arasati." You know what Bilal says? He says those houses where the Quran was recited, those houses are empty right now. Diyaru aliyin wa Jaffarin wa Hamzata wa Sajjadi diltafanati. The house of Ali and Sajjad, the house of Hamza and Jaffar, that house is empty. After that, Bilal, he recites the line that breaks the heart of each individual. Bilal says, "Afatimu yabnat al-khair qumi wandubi nujuma samawatin bi ardi falati." Bilal, he recited the line that, "O Fatima, come to the desert. Zahra, look at your stars which are scattered upon the plains of the desert." Bilal, he continues, he says, "Wa bi kufan wa ukhra bi taybatin nalaha salawati." Bilal says there's a grave in Kufa and there's a grave in these different places in Baghdad. Imam al-Rida says, "Oh Bilal, can I give you a line which will finish your qasida, oh Bilal?" Imam al-Rida says, "Oh Bilal, wa qabrun bitusan ya laha min musiba." He says, "Oh Bilal, there will also be a grave in Tus in Khurasan." Bilal says, "Oh my master, whose grave will that be?" Imam al-Rida says, "Oh Bilal, that will be my grave." You know, at that moment, it's stated that from the side of the women, a messenger comes. That messenger says, "Oh Ali ibn Musa al-Rida, your sister Fatima is fallen unconscious." I say, "Oh Fatima al-Ma'suma, you only heard about the death of your brother. What about Zainab in Karbala? That from Tilla Zainabiyya, Zainab would watch وَالشِّمَرْ جَالِسٌ عَلَى صَدْرِ الْحُسَيْنِ. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا ويا منقلب ينقلبون. Ya Allah, we ask through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. There are many in this gathering, they have different challenges and difficulties. Ya Allah, through the right of the love of Sayyid al-Shuhada they carry in their hearts, help them. And we pray for the hastening of the master of our time, Matam Hussein.
Yo sing Karwa, 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 Karwa. ये सिर्फ से हुए करबला एक कारवा रुखसत हुआ سر پہ علم سایہ فگن غازی کی آتی ہے صدا پہلا سفر زینب کا ہے سنسان کر دو راستہ کارواں کارواں عباس میرے کارواں 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 عباس کیا شان ہے کیا دبدبا کیا لوگ ہے قرآنما صلی اللہ آیات کا ہے قافلہ مشق و علم ان کا نشاں عباس میرے کارواں 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 اللہ کے پیارے ہے یہ آل نبی سارے ہے یہ قرآن کے پارے ہے یہ کونین کے تارے ہے یہ زیر قدم ہے آسماں عباس میرے کارواں 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 عباس میرے کارواں 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 عباس میرے کارواں پر محمد